I'd like to introduce you at this time to someone very special. As a respected pastor, author, and professor, William Graham Tullian Tchividjian is committed to seeing people set free by the radical, amazing power of God's grace. Mr. Tchividjian is the grandson of Dr. Billy Graham, a Florida native, and currently the senior pastor of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He was the founding pastor of the former New City Church, which merged with Coral Ridge in 2009. A graduate of Columbia International University, philosophy, Tchividjian is the author of numerous books, including Jesus Plus Nothing Equals Everything, which was awarded Christianity Today's 2012 Book Award in the Christian Living category and was a finalist for the 2011 ECPA Christian Book Awards. Our own Dr. Larry Moyer enthusiastically endorses Tullian's book. Dr. Moyer said, quote, "If you have not read Jesus Plus Nothing Equals Everything by Tullian Tchividjian, I would highly recommend it to every believer. It explains how a clear understanding of the gospel is not just essential to entering the Christian life, it is also essential to living it. When he's not reading, studying, preaching, or writing, Tullian enjoys being with people and relaxing with his wife and 3 kids. Would you please join me in giving an Van Til welcome to Tullian Tchividjian."
Well, it is great to be with you. I almost didn't make it. I flew in from New York City. New York and Dallas are 2 very, very different places. Flew in from New York, and they don't know what they're doing up there at those airports. So not only was the flight delayed by 45 minutes, but then they got us all on the plane, and we backed out and we started to make our way down the runway, at which time the pilot said that we were number 33 for takeoff. 33, okay? I couldn't believe it. I thought I had heard, well, anyway, so we sat on the runway for about an hour and 20 minutes, and that was a lot of fun. And they started serving drinks to the people who wanted them, and the guy next to me ordered about 12. So, needless to say, I ended up moving my seat. But it's really, really, really good to be here. Just made it in time, but it's great to be here. What an honor for me to be here at such a remarkable celebration. 40 years of commitment to not only presenting the gospel clearly to people who don't know the gospel, but also helping to equip Christians know what the gospel is and how to present the gospel. Van Til is a remarkable ministry, and I get a lot of invitations to speak at different places, and because I have a wife and 3 kids in a church that I pastor, I usually say no to more things than I say yes to. And when my assistant put this request in front of me and I did my research on what Van Til was all about, I immediately said, I want to go. I want to go be there with those people and support what they're doing. So it's a huge honor to be here. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Larry, for your invitation. 2009 was by far the hardest year of my life. Now, I'm only 40, okay, and my table just told me that they have no sympathy for me at all, but I have sympathy for myself. 40 was a rough one for me because I still feel like I'm 18, and when I turned 40, I remembered when my dad turned 40, and I thought at the time that he turned 40, he's such an old man, and I didn't feel old when I turned 40, and so it was kind of a rough one for me, but I'm sure that I will experience worse years to come and harder experiences than the one that I had in 2009. But in the short 40 years that I've been alive, 2009 was by far the hardest year of my life, and I'll tell you why. 2 reasons. One, My dad, who was my best friend and my chief counselor and advisor, my greatest encourager, got sick and died. We watched him die a slow death over the course of 9 or 10 months. That was also the year that the church I planted in 2003 merged with Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, about 20 minutes down the road from where our church had been meeting. And as you know, if you've ever experienced a merger of any sort, when you try to merge two families, you try to merge two businesses, certainly if you try to merge two churches, it's not easy. And what ended up happening during the course of that year was so incredibly painful, so difficult, brought me to the point of complete, absolute desperation, and I would not trade it for all the money in the world, because even though for years I had understood the gospel, for years I had been preaching the gospel, I did not fully grasp the functional power of the gospel for my life each and every moment in each and every day until I went through that terrible crucible of ache. The verses that set me free during that season of my life were found in Colossians, Paul's letter to the Colossians. And I'll just take you back in time a little bit. When the two churches merged, we expected it to be difficult, because we knew that there would be people on both sides who wanted things to stay the same. And one of the things we said when we merged the two churches was, if nothing changes for this group, that will mean that everything will have to change for this group. And if nothing changes for this group, that means that everything will have to change for this group. So we made a statement at the beginning that everybody received very, very well, and it was this: everything's changing for everybody, all right? So as we started to implement those changes and as we started to bring these two churches together, there was a loud, small, but very vocal group of longtime Coral Ridge people who did not want anything to change. And so they resisted, very, very ferociously resisted all of the changes that we were making. And within a month of my arrival, a petition drive had started to have me removed. It's a wonderful welcome. You know, if you're a pastor, if you've ever been on the receiving end of a petition drive, you know how fun those are. And I had always been in places in churches where I was widely loved and approved of and accepted. And now for the very first time in my life, I was in a place where I was not widely loved, not widely accepted, not widely approved of. We didn't know where the next bullet was going to come from. We were engaged in what seemed to be a desperate battle. And I was at the absolute end of myself. The absolute end of myself. I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I was scared. I was angry. I was confused. I was frustrated. I didn't know what God was doing. We had put together a group of people, 3 guys from Coral Ridge and 3 guys from New City, the church I had planted, along with me. We came together before the merger happened. We came together to explore whether or not we should even merge these two churches. And we met every single week for 3 months to go through this meticulous due diligence list to see whether or not this was in fact what God was calling us to do. And at the conclusion of that 3 months, we decided this is what God is calling us to do. His leading was unmistakable. That these two churches should come together. And so during this time when all of these battles were raging, I really started questioning God. What are you doing? And my family and I, this was end of June 2009. I got there. The two churches merged on Easter Sunday 2009. So I'd been there for about 2.5 months when my family and I left for vacation. I was very tempted that summer not to go away on vacation because the church needed so much of my attention. But I didn't want my children and my wife to resent ministry and resent church. And so we kept our vacation time. And we went to the southwest coast of Florida. We do this every year. We drive across the state and we rent a little place on the beach and we just rest and relax for a few weeks. And the first morning I woke up on our vacation, I grabbed a cup of coffee And I grabbed my Bible, and I opened my Bible, and I looked at my Bible reading plan to see what passages I was assigned to read that morning, or I was supposed to read that morning. And Colossians chapter 1 was the passage that I was supposed to read on that particular day. So I'm sitting out on the balcony of the place that we rented. I'm overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, and I'm literally, as I said, at the end of myself. Desperate, confused, angry, had just come off the hardest 2.5 months of my life, and I had it out with God. God can handle honest prayers. And I said, "What have you done? What have you done? I mean, you have ruined my life. You wanted me to do this. I did it, and this is what I get in return." And so I started reading Colossians chapter 1. That was my opening prayer before I read Colossians chapter 1, all right? And this is what I read in these verses, Colossians chapter 1, beginning in verse 9. Paul writes, "For this reason, we also, since the day we heard it, do not cease to pray for you, and to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will in all wisdom and spiritual understanding, that you may walk worthy of the Lord, fully pleasing him, being fruitful in every good work and increasing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all might according to his glorious power, for all patience and long suffering with joy." And I said, all of that stuff that Paul was praying for the Colossians, I was in desperate need of. God's strength, endurance, patience, joy, all of those things. So I started to resonate with this prayer. I started to pray this prayer for myself. And then I went on, and these verses changed my life. I had read these verses 1,000 times. But when you are at the end of your rope, and my friend John Zoll says God's office is at the end of your rope. When you are at the end of your rope, you see things. It's like Job, who said, "Before my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." Well, what was the thing that made Job go from hearing to seeing? Pain, suffering, loss, tragedy, being on his back with nowhere to look but up. And that was me. And so I was reading these verses with fresh eyes and fresh ears, and I came to verse 12, where Paul writes, "Giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified us to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in the light. He has delivered us from the power of darkness and conveyed us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, in whom we already have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins." Those verses changed my life. And the reason those verses changed my life is because at that moment I recognized functionally, not just theologically, but I recognized functionally that everything I needed and longed for in Christ I already possess. I was longing for, I didn't realize until human approval and human acceptance was gone, that I had been living my life in dependence on human approval and human acceptance to make me feel like I mattered. I didn't even realize that. I was unconscious of the fact that these things had become idols in my life, things that I was depending on to invest my life with meaning and worth and value. If people validated me, then my existence was justified. If people loved me, and if people accepted me, and if people approved of me, then I felt like I mattered. Well, I didn't even realize that was going on until that was stripped away. And then I realized just how I had come to depend on human approval and human acceptance to make me feel like I mattered after it was taken away. And so I'm reading these verses, and God, it was so clear to me. God says, all of the acceptance, all of the approval, all of the love that you're looking for and longing for in Christ you already possess. Everything you need in Christ is already yours. That Jesus sweepingly secured all that your heart could ever crave and gives that to you for free. Well, in that moment, that just scales fell from my eyes, because I realized at that point when I said in my prayer, I said, "God, just give me my old life back." And he said, "It's not your old life you want back, it's your old idols you want back, and I love you too much to give them to you." In other words, he was taking something away from me. and reminding me that all that I longed for and needed in Christ I already possess. This is the illustration that I use twice, and I think this has something to do with the fact that I've just turned 40, or almost a year. I'm almost 41 now. But twice this past year, I've been late for an appointment, I've been late for a meeting, and I have been running around my house frantically trying to find my car keys. Twice, okay? And as I'm late looking for my car keys, I'm barking at everybody in my house, okay? I mean, my wife, Kim, where are my keys? I mean, did you misplace my keys? Where are they? My wife is the kind of woman who, I promise you, if I have a glass of water and I put it on the kitchen counter and I walk to the bathroom 4 feet away and I'm there for 15 seconds, and I come back, it's in the dishwasher, okay? So I'm looking at her going, okay, I mean, did you take my keys? Did you put them somewhere? I look at all three of my kids. I have an 18-year-old son, a 16-year-old son, and an 11-year-old girl, and I look at all three of my kids. Where are my keys? Did any of you play with my keys? Did you take my keys? Did you see my keys? No, Dad, we haven't seen your keys. We don't know where your keys are. Then I start barking at all the animals. My wife is like Dr. Doolittle, I promise you. Animals show up to our house, I promise you. I found a guinea pig in our house probably, 2 months ago. I was like, what is this? It looks like a hairpiece with red eyes and claws. It's the ugliest thing you've ever seen in your life. I was like, what is this in our den? She's like, well, the kids and I wanted a guinea pig. I was like, the kids didn't want the guinea pig. You wanted the guinea pig. And as my kids get older, my wife gets more animals because she says she wants something to nurture. I'm like, seriously? You need animals to nurture? Anyway, like, what am I, chopped liver? Nurture me! I'm barking at the animals, barking at my wife, barking at the kids. Where are my keys? Where are my keys? Where are my keys? Where are my keys? Frantically searching for my keys and getting everybody in my house upset in the meantime. And both times, I've gone into my bedroom to look for my keys one last time, stuck my hand in my pocket, and they were there. Both times, okay? Now, we laugh at that because we say, what moron spends 20 minutes frantically searching for keys that are in his pocket and yelling at everybody in his house in the process? Well, I am, okay? But so are you. And this is what I mean by that. Most people spend their lives, you and I do, okay? Whether you've been a Christian for 10 minutes or whether you've been a Christian for 30 years, we spend our lives frantically searching under every rock and behind every tree for something that we already possess. We look for approval. We look for acceptance. We try to generate our own worth. We try to generate our own meaning. We try to generate our own significance and our own security. We try to locate our identity in who we can become or what other people think we are. And the entire time we're frantically searching for these things, the shout of God's good news comes our way for free, and it's God saying, the keys are in your pocket. Everything you need in Christ you already possess. Everything. It's amazing to me when I think about what I call the now power of the gospel. That the gospel doesn't just save us from the past, and it doesn't just save us in the future. It saves us here and now. If you've been a Christian for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, you need the gospel just as much today as you did the day you were saved. See, I didn't grow up realizing that. I grew up in church where, the gospel was for people outside the church. People outside the church need the gospel, and then once the gospel gets you in, you move on to deeper things, different things. That the gospel was just the ABCs of the Christian faith. But the fact of the matter is that the gospel is not just the ABCs of the Christian faith, it's the A to Z of the Christian faith. And once God saves us, He never moves us beyond the gospel. He moves us more deeply into the gospel because we never ever outgrow our need for Christ's finished work, ever. So here I was, a preacher, a Christian, a husband, a father, someone who had been a Christian for 20 years, and I was miserable, absolutely miserable, at the end of my rope because I forgot the gospel. I forgot that everything I needed in Christ I already possessed. I forgot that Jesus already secured all of God's approval for me. So I don't need the approval of other people. Jesus already secured for me all of God's love. So I didn't need the love of the people around me, which changes everything in your life. Absolutely everything. Think about how that would impact your relationships. Just your marriage, for instance. If you realize that because Jesus won for me, I'm free to lose. Because Jesus succeeded for me, I'm free to fail. When you take that dynamic into a relationship, it changes everything. Because now I don't need anything from you. Everything I need in Christ I already possess. So now I am free to give you everything without needing anything from you in return. Anything. That changes all of life. It completely sets you free. It sets your relationships free. Well, that's the lesson I learned in 2009, and it's the one thing I can't stop talking about. There's never more than the gospel. There's just more of the gospel. And one of the reasons I love what this ministry is all about is because it recognizes that the gospel is not just for non-Christian people. The gospel is for Christian people too. The gospel sets us free here and now from things like resentment and bitterness and anger and entitlement and all of the slavery that goes with that. The gospel saves us. Martin Luther said, I have to preach the gospel to myself every day because I forget it every day. And I have to preach the gospel to my people every week because I forget it every week. The sin underneath every sin is unbelief. We need to be perpetually reminded, it is true, it is true, it is true. And so if you're a Christian, you live your life under a banner that reads, it is finished. It's a done deal. You don't need to spend your life slavishly getting. Now you can spend your life sacrificially giving because everything you need in Christ you have. Well, this is a ministry that is absolutely devoted to the radicality of the gospel of God's amazing grace, the hilarity of God's outrageous mercy, and showing how that's not just for people outside the church, but it's for people inside the church too. I'll just close with this, and it's because I believe that's what this ministry is all about that I say this. Someone asked me not long ago, how would you distinguish what God called your grandfather to do with what he's called you to do? Speaking to me. And I said, well, there are a lot of differences. I mean, gosh, I'm a local pastor and he was a traveling evangelist, and, those dynamics are very different, obviously. But I said, my grandfather was called by God to take the gospel to people outside the church. And God has called me to take the gospel to people inside the church. And same message, different audience. I said, he carried the gospel to people inside the church, and I carry the gospel to people outside the church, but that's primarily how to distinguish our calling. What I love about Evantel is it cares about taking the gospel to people outside the church and people inside the church. We need it. I'm out there. I see it. I see the slavery and the bondage that people in church live in. And I'm telling you, I am hoping and praying for a brand new reformation of God's amazing grace to sweep across the church in America and set people free. And I am glad and honored that I can partner with this particular ministry to do that as they partner with me. So thank you for your time. Thank you for being here tonight. I know it means a lot to the ministry leaders here, and I appreciate you listening.